Tennis is supposed to be a sanctuary of competition, a stage where athletic brilliance takes center court. But for many women players, that stage has also become a place of danger and intrusion. Across decades, some of the sport's biggest names have found themselves at the receiving end of harassment, from obsessive stalkers who fixated on them to angry bettors hiding behind anonymous social media accounts. And in one infamous case, even a fan of a rival player who took his obsession too far. This isn't about family feuds or locker room scandals. This is about fans who turned into threats, about players who could no longer feel safe on the court, in their homes, or even online. From Monica Seles in the 1990s to Emma Raducanu, Iga Swiatek, Elina Svitolina, and others today, these stories reveal a troubling pattern. And to see just how deep this problem runs, we need to start with the moment that shocked the tennis world in 1993. On April 30th, 1993, women's tennis was changed forever. Monica Seles, just 19 years old and ranked #1 in the world, was competing at a tournament in Hamburg. During a changeover, she leaned forward to sip water, and in that moment, a man from the crowd slipped through the security line. He stabbed her in the back with a knife. The attacker was later identified as a fan of Steffi Graf, Seles's great rival at the time. He admitted he wanted to injure Seles so Graf could reclaim the #1 ranking. Incredibly and thankfully, Seles survived, but she never truly came back the same player. What shocked the tennis world just as much was how unprepared the sport had been. There was little visible security around the players. Spectators could get close without real checks. The incident forced tennis authorities to rethink how to protect athletes on court. Seles's stabbing became the turning point, the moment that made clear how dangerous obsessive fans could be. In the aftermath of the Seles attack, tennis finally woke up. Tournaments brought in stricter security checks, tighter barriers between players and fans, and more visible protection around the court. The message was clear. What happened in Hamburg could never happen again. And yet, as much as it raised awareness, it did not put an end to the problem. Harassment would continue in different forms, sometimes less violent, but still deeply damaging. The larger problem never went away. Obsessive behavior simply found new outlets. Stalkers began targeting players at their homes or hotels. Online platforms gave angry fans and gamblers direct access to players' phones through social media. And sometimes the intrusion came not from strangers in the stands, but from the very coverage and attention that followed these athletes everywhere. The Seles incident was meant to be the turning point, the moment women's tennis would feel safe again. Instead, it became the benchmark against which every new harassment case was measured. Proof that while the sport could stop knives, it couldn't stop words, threats, or unwanted attention from crossing the line. The warning signs were always there. According to reports, even before Monica Seles was attacked in Hamburg, women's tennis had already seen troubling cases of extreme fandom crossing the line. Players like Martina Navratilova, Chris Evert, and Gabriela Sabatini, among others, had all been at the receiving end of this unwanted attention. Evert, one of the sport's most respected champions, was reportedly shocked to discover a stalker hiding in her closet after returning home from Wimbledon. Gigi Fernandez, a doubles star of the late 1980s and early 90s, spoke of being followed by what was described as an annoying admirer. Individually, these incidents may not have made the same headlines as Seles's stabbing, but together they pointed to a pattern, proof that the risks for women players were always there, long before the most infamous case made the world pay attention. As mentioned earlier, the stabbing of Monica Seles had forced tennis to act, and serious security measures were introduced at tournaments. But the obsession didn't disappear, it simply moved away from the court itself. Players began to talk about unwanted attention outside stadiums. strangers waiting near hotels, turning up at practice courts, sending disturbing letters. Even in the 2000s, some of the biggest stars in the sport, including Serena Williams, would face stalkers showing up at her home or events. For all the fences and extra guards, the reality was that harassment and stalking had not gone away. They had only shifted location. Serena, who would go on to become the global face of women's tennis, wasn't safe either. In 2002, a German man named Albrecht Strohmeyer was arrested outside Wimbledon. He had followed Serena across multiple tournaments in Germany, Italy, Britain, France, and the United States. When questioned, he told police he loved her but would never hurt her. Serena, trying to stay strong, brushed it off publicly. "I don't really pay any attention to anything like that. I'm a strong person. I try not to let things like that affect me." But less than a decade later, another stalker appeared. In 2011, Patinema Ouedraogo was arrested outside Serena's gated Florida subdivision, carrying a love letter to her in his backpack. He had pretended to be her assistant, tried to approach her agent, and had already been the subject of a restraining order. Neither man laid a hand on her, but the fact that they got that close shows how fragile the line can be. After all, one obsessed fan had already changed the history of the sport in 1993. For Serena, the danger was real, and it could so easily have escalated into something just as horrific. If the 1990s and 2000s exposed players to stalkers in person, the 2010s brought a new kind of threat. Social media opened a direct line between athletes and the outside world, and it quickly turned ugly. For the first time, players had to deal with thousands of strangers weighing in on their lives. Abuse poured in after defeats, with some accused of letting fans down or costing gamblers money. Others were targeted for their fashion, their celebrations, or even just for showing emotion on court. In many cases, the criticism had nothing to do with tennis at all. It was simply about who they were. What made it worse was the volume. A single disappointing performance or an outspoken comment could trigger hundreds of abusive messages within minutes. For young players, barely out of their teens, the psychological toll was immense. And while most of this abuse stayed online, it created an atmosphere of intimidation. It reinforced the idea that players were never truly off the clock, never safe from scrutiny. The court was no longer the only stage. Their social media feeds had become another arena of attack. But if online abuse made tennis feel less safe in the digital age, the problem didn't stay confined to screens. For some players, the threats became physical again. Stalkers at their homes, fixated fans in stadiums, even ex-partners turning up uninvited. In more recent times, Emma Raducanu, Iga Świątek, Elina Svitolina, Jody Burrage, Danielle Collins, and Karolina Muchova, among others, have all faced situations where their careers were overshadowed by harassment, intimidation, or unwanted intrusion. Each case looks different, but together they show that even in today's supposedly safer, more professional era, women in tennis remain as vulnerable as ever. Emma Raducanu has faced both sides of the menace, a convicted stalker who followed her home in 2021, and a disturbing episode in Dubai where a man's fixated behavior in the stands left her in tears mid-match. Iga Świątek was first abused online, only to see the same individual confront her in person during a Miami practice session, hurling insults at her and her family. Elina Svitolina received a flood of hate messages from angry bettors after her Montreal loss in 25, forcing her to speak out. "I'm a mom before I'm an athlete. The way you talk to women is shameful." Jody Burrage, after her Wimbledon exit the same summer, revealed she was barraged with messages attacking both her game and her appearance. Danielle Collins has repeatedly spoken about personal space, most memorably admonishing a cameraman in Strasbourg for zooming in too close, a reminder that intrusion comes from media as much as fans. Karolina Muchova admitted feeling unsettled when her ex-boyfriend turned up in the stands at the US Open, a case where no rules were broken, yet the boundaries of comfort were crossed. It gets worse. Because it isn't only the stars of the sport who've been targeted, even juniors barely out of school have had to deal with obsessive fans. As the New York Times reported in 1997, parents of teenage players described strangers turning up repeatedly at matches, following their children to hotels, or lingering around practice courts. The article warned of the dangerously thin line of fanaticism in a setting where security was almost non-existent. For young girls trying to build their careers, the risks were clear, yet rarely spoken about. At the junior level, safeguards have traditionally been weakest. Matches are often played at small venues with little to no crowd control. Unlike the pro circuit, there are no dedicated security teams, no fenced-off areas, and often no formal system for reporting harassment. The ITEF and local federations have, in recent years, introduced stricter codes of conduct for tournaments, background checks for coaches, and education programs for parents and players. But the reality is that many junior events still run on shoestring budgets, making real security the exception, not the rule. And that is what makes this issue even more alarming. Harassment in tennis doesn't just start at the top. It can begin before a player has even earned their first ranking point. From Chris Evert's closet stalker to Monica Seles' stabbing. From Serena Williams' stalkers to the flood of online abuse faced by today's stars, the story has been consistent. Tennis players, especially women, have never truly been safe from obsessive attention. Each era has brought a different face to the same problem. In the 1980s, it was extreme fans who crossed personal boundaries. In the 1990s, it took a violent turn with cells. In the 2000s, Serena showed that not even the biggest global icon was immune. And in today's digital age, the menace flows freely from online platforms to practice courts and stadium stands. Perhaps most worrying of all, it doesn't just begin at the top. Even juniors playing on backcourts with little or no security have had to learn what it means to be on guard before they've even played a grand slam. The sport has taken steps. Barriers have been raised, codes of conduct written, security staff added. But the truth is clear. The stalking menace hasn't disappeared. It has simply evolved. And that leaves tennis with a question it still hasn't fully answered. How much longer can it afford to treat harassment as an isolated problem, rather than a systemic one? Because, until the game confronts it head-on, every player who steps on court knows they may not just be playing for points. They may also be playing for their safety. Tennis is a game built on grace, rivalry, and resilience, but behind the trophies and highlight reels are human beings who deserve to feel safe when they compete. Their battles should be on the court, not against stalkers, abusers, or intrusions that strip away their peace. So, as fans, maybe the best question we can ask ourselves is this: how do we celebrate these players without ever forgetting their right to be safe, as athletes and as people? Comment with your views on this, and subscribe to our channel for more of such tennis stories.